It was going to be a rough ride, but he really was a mentor to us in a way that had nothing to tell us about how to write or draw. It was like a bigger deal and how to handle ourselves.
That's the harder thing about talking about Ken, especially people that didn't know him. People who did know him, they shake their heads and they get it, but he didn't have like a lesson list or anything like that. He never told you what to do or how to do it or anything like that. You just kind of learned by osmosis, I think, with Ken. Osmosis and cigar smoke.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, he helped us bridge that gap between fan and pro.
I don't know if you did. I'm sure you must have, but when I was down and broke and starving, which was most of the time, he'd hire me to work in his stores.
Really? I never did that, but I worked and even ran bookstores when I was younger.
Yeah, wow.
So being there must have really been
an experience.
being a fly on the wall among a lot of flies on the wall.
There were a lot of flies.
There were a lot of real flies on those walls too. So, yeah, because let me see if I can edit this because I really don't want to say something bad in front of my little sweet girl. He had a candle of a male member that must have been this big and this big around, and it was on top of a bookshelf in the corner. You told me I should tell this, so
yes.
I am. This is typical.
Child would be in the audience.
But it so sums up Ken in a weird way, because he had this thing up there, and I don't know why he had it up there. He could have taken it down, but he didn't. Instead, he put like on a little 3x5 card that he taped to it, "Yes, it's a candle." And it was like that. It's like so how many times had he been asked that question before he put that up? And that was easier for him than taking it down. And he didn't, at least to me, never exhibit any kind of peculiarities that way. It wasn't like, I don't know why it didn't mean a damn thing. I don't know why it was even up there.
For yucks.
Yeah, it was almost like I want people to react to it, but I really don't want to hear you ask me about it. I just want you to react to it.
Was it for sale?
No, I never asked. I didn't want it, that's for sure.
I don't think it was. No.
I had one of my own.
I don't think it was.
And mine had a card that said, "I bet you wish it was a candle."
And I'm not going to touch it.
My biggest regret with Ken was one time, at that moment in your life when you're about 18 and you're thinking, I'm a man now. I really got it all put together. And now I own so many toys that it's ridiculous, but I had the greatest toy of my life, and I sold it for like $10 to Ken at a swap meet. Those of you who are, I don't think there's anybody here as old as me, but there was this toy in the mid-60s called King Zor. It was an ideal toy. It was designed by the same guy that designed the Mousetrap game and stuff, so it had that real cool, almost, the real modern colors and stuff, and it was a robot dinosaur that tracked you down, and you had to have like a big dart gun, and if you shot it in the tail, it would come around, and I'm not being rude here, it had balls in its back, and it would shoot balls at you, and when its tongue went up against the wall, it was like it'd be pressed, and then it would turn around 180 degrees. It was the most aggressive toy possible. And I was so queer for dinosaurs and science fiction to have a robot dinosaur, and I mean, it was about this big. I've since bought one. In fact, I've got two because I want to try to cobble them together and make one that actually works someday. At age 61, I have toy projects, and so I have the time and money to do that. But I was like, yeah, take it, Ken. You've got. I think. Which was it? Pete or Gus that was little about in the 80s.
And they were both little in the 80s.
Well, I remember that was going to be for them.
Yeah.
And about a week after, I was like, what did I do? I sold my favorite toy. I never asked for it back. But But that was the only thing I ever regretted with Ken, was that it was my idea and he went for it. But he paid me, I think $25, no, not $25. I think he paid me $10 a page for using my story, which was about a big monster made of poop who climbs out of the sewers named the Turd. And my buddy John Pound, who I went to high school with, he took up the remainder of at least the first printing of it. Another local guy, David Cody Weiss, had a story in the second edition of it. And he paid me $10 a piece to print it and $10 a piece to own the original art. And that was not only, other than designing remember I designed a sign that was at Don's Hamburgers up on the corner of 54th and El Cajon back in the late 50s, early 60s. I got like $5 for making a sign that said cheeseburgers or something. This was the first time I'd really gotten money for cartooning, and it was certainly the first time I'd been paid for actually writing and drawing a story. And even in junior high and high school, I was doing stuff for the papers. But that kind of was an education in itself. Did you ever have that opportunity to see, like, okay, I have to draw it big and it shrinks down and I have to figure out how to make it readable?
Oh yeah.
And then the kids have to let me know if they got the gag. And I immediately went the wrong way because I started doing, our high school character was the Colt. So I did like a George of the Jungle style parody. I had Colt Man was a superhero, but he was like a goofy superhero. Okay, that kind of connected. But then I put in a parody of the Justice League of America. And even as a kid, it never really sunk in that normal people don't read comics. And Crawford High here in town was a huge high school. They split it up into Patrick Henry and Crawford, and then it was the two biggest high schools in San Diego. That's how big it was. But I had a large, if somewhat unwilling audience to look at my stuff, and occasionally I was funny, and occasionally the stuff kind of turned out good, and that was kind of my only training until Ken was just kind of feedback. But getting paid for it made a big difference. So we want to kind of talk to kids, or if any of you adults want to ask any questions about how to get in the business, or what it was like trying to get into business, or
how to
what
get
Ken
out.
was like, how to get out of the business. I don't want to get out of the business, but it's like a little side story. Some of you know, and you probably know Joe Ferrara in Santa Cruz.
Oh yeah.
Joe is like my brother from another mother. I knew him for 10 minutes, and suddenly he was like an old friend.
Yeah.
And he's a very savvy businessman. He's a musician at heart and does a lot of music, but he runs one of the best stores I've ever seen that's actually friendly to people like Ava, and it's open and it's clean, and it's painted a relaxing kind of sea foam green color and the whole thing. And once to Sergio Aragones, who's a mutual friend, I said, boy, Joe's really a smart guy. And Sergio, without missing a beat, said, if he's so smart, why is he running a comic book shop? and Sergio loves him. He wasn't being mean. He was just saying, if he was really smart, he'd be in a business that people needed. And, being a cartoonist is kind of weird because the average person doesn't need, they like reading comics in the paper or online or something, but the average person, other than maybe if they needed a tattoo design, they don't need you. Nobody in the average world says, I need a cartoon drawn up by Tuesday. I mean, it's like, and look in the phone book. There is no listing for cartoonists. Nobody ever needs to reach a cartoonist. So, I'm not trying to be negative here, but remember, it's like you are the one that has to go out and find people that need you, which is, as many comic books are being published, it's really still hard to be in the right place at the right time with the right people, paying the right page rate, and and you're competing with people that hopefully they'll hire you because you're at least, you have to be better than the people they're using.
Yeah, when I deal with an awful lot of new and upcoming creators, And every now and then we get one that doesn't get it and gets a swelled head. And I have to remind him that, you're doing funny books, you're not curing AIDS, it's like, let's keep things in perspective,
In animation, which I also do a lot of work for, we get a lot of students from Cal Arts. And at Cal Arts, have you dealt with the Cal Arts Mafia?
Yeah.
And it's not a bad school, but these kids for sometimes 3 or 4 years get to indulge their own taste in what they want to make a cartoon about. And it's usually kind of imitation Chuck Jones drawing with Tex Avery or Mike Judge gags, people getting their heads blown off and stuff. And I was working on Muppet Babies, and we worked directly for Jim Henson. CBS kind of stepped back because if Jim Henson's looking at this, it's fine with us. I mean, it was unheard of. You were at Marvel when you were working on some of that.
Yeah, I was
and we were kind of a crew unto ourselves. It was like,
yeah, you guys were over on the other side of the building.
We kind of got. That was probably the best, most creative job I ever had doing Saturday morning, because they just said, okay, well, if you have ideas, we want to see your ideas and stuff. But anyway, this kid came and he's now at Pixar, he's now, pro and everything, but this was his first job. And the show had been on TV for a season, and then they doubled the order, so we had to provide an hour a week. And so we were hiring a bunch of people, and I was a story director, but I also was the head of character design. And he was very good, so I didn't actually hire him, but I kind of had met with him and told the producer, yeah, I think I could work with this guy's good. And he came in and immediately informed me that we turned it. This is a funny drawing, but this isn't what we're doing. This is like the characters have to move around like babies. It's like it's a cartoon in some ways, but it's more of an illustration of these characters because they were introduced in Muppets Take Manhattan. Some of you, I'm sure, have seen that. And this was the big overall thing. Of course, this was the way they were expanding their brand and they were the first about that thing where we saw Flintstone babies and this studio I worked for, Marvel Productions. Did you ever see the pitch they had developed for Star Trek babies? That idiot Bill Dubay had something done where they go through a cloud and they all turn babies, and babies are running the Enterprise. And they hadn't even approached Paramount. They figured, well, if the network's interested, then we'll tell Paramount we pitched it to them, and then we'll make a deal. Of course, it was so idiotic, nobody'd go near it. But anyway, this kid back on
sounds so
point.
Typically Hollywood to me.
Yeah. This kid said, well, I said, that's not the style of our show. Have you watched any of our shows? And he said, yeah, but he said it should look like this, really. I think it should look like this. This kid, about maybe 19. And I said, I love Tex Avery. I worked with Tex Avery at Hanna-Barbera. Tex is dead now, but I said, I've got a phone right here, and I've got his number. If you can get through to him, I'd really suggest that you give Jim a call and tell him that he's been wrong. And the show that we just got the Emmy for is really not very good. And if it looked more like Tex Avery and didn't look like a Muppet, that you would certainly like it better. And he was like, oh, yeah, okay. And he kind of slunk away. So I didn't want to. I was a jerk, but I was kind of I kept it low, like, hey, you might.
Be my guest.
Yeah, go right ahead, straighten it out, I mean, you've got the world by the tail, and he's kind of been struggling because he's Jim Henson. So.
Don't you wish you were a teenager again so you knew everything?
Yeah, well, I still don't know anything. On the other hand, I had a kid that was one of my designers from the word go. And I had two good kids that were doing stuff, but this one kid was an icy kid. Again, he was 19 at the most. And he would do these wonderful designs, wonderfully whimsical drawings. And he was from Cal Arts. And he'd sit there, he was a good-looking kid. He was one of the few cartoonists I've ever seen that could be a clothes model or something. He had Spider-Man's build. In fact, when they needed publicity, they had a Spidey costume that they'd asked this artist, this cartoonist, to put on the Spidey costume. You know the famous shot of Stan Lee and Spider-Man nose, that's this kid. Anyway, he'd sit there drawing, and I can't even do the noise. He's going, and it was like, oh, okay, he's eccentric, he's a cartoonist. Well, I don't know, maybe it was 15 years later, he'd gone on to a career at Disney, and we always stayed friends. This cool new movie comes out, and the lead character, the title character, is a character that goes, he had created Lilo and Stitch. And that movie, knowing Chris, it's probably the only personal film that Disney ever produced. The entire movie was an extension of Chris's personality, his creative tastes and stuff. I mean, that movie is, I could watch it a zillion times. By the way, you probably don't know it, but that movie was almost done, and then 9/11 happened, and they had to completely redo the ending of the big spaceship chase around the buildings, because they were like going through buildings, the buildings are collapsing and stuff. But there for a while, Stitch, I think, was probably, other than maybe Winnie the Pooh, Disney's biggest moneymaker as far as licensing and stuff, because it was just so weird. You know, he was like a deadly little creature that decided he didn't have to, I'm almost crying because I'm so tired, but it was like, you know, it was kind of like Iron Giant. It's like you can change your destiny. And that was the coolest, because there was never, in the Ohana thing about family, you don't leave anybody behind. And, you know, everybody liked this character. So there was a kid that understood the importance of not trying to assert yourself. And I always tell kids, and I don't want to sound like the old man on the mountain, but learn to listen. We have friends who are from Thailand, and they've got a Thai restaurant in our old neighborhood, and we've watched their kids grow up, and they have a son, Justin, who's now working at Disney, and he's probably about 24. But I have a lot of friends in the business that do a lot of different things, and I brought in a guy that was an art director for movies like the Back to the Future movies and Jurassic Park and the Flintstones and a lot of big movies. And Justin brought his portfolio, and Justin's really good. I mean, he draws stuff that I couldn't even think of approaching. I mean, it's not cartoony stuff, it's like sci-fi environments and movie set type stuff. And I asked my friend, I said, you know, so what do you think? And he said, he'll be able to do it. He said, he's really talented, but he listens. He doesn't try to give me explanations or, you know, I didn't have enough time to finish this thing, or this isn't my best work, or you want to talk about all the excuses we hear when somebody shows you their work?
Their portfolio, yeah. Like when I hear that from these guys, you know, well, I meant to do this, and this was supposed to be, so I go, so if we publish this as a book, are you going to go around to every single store that the book is sold in and say to every single person that picks the book up, this is what I meant to do? No. Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
I used to say that to the executive producers on Saturday morning. I said, you want to draft a memo and we'll send it out to kids why 3 minutes of it was in black and white because you were too cheap to pay the studio for the last series you did. And I'm not making this up, this stuff happened. They go, don't ask for any changes because we still owe them money on the last series. It wasn't on my show. I produced a thing called Camp Candy. I worked with John Candy very closely on it. But there was a thing called Captain N, the Game Master, and it was like all these Nintendo characters, like it's the Justice League of Video or something. And they sent this thing out, and it was the first premiere episode. And they sent it so late and screwed it up so bad, like 5 minutes of it was just pencil text. And they aired it on NBC, and the head of the studio, Deke, which is D-I-C for Do It Cheaper, he said the kids won't notice. And I said, the least you could do is maybe like, even with a still, have voiceover, say, hey kids, this is what cartoons look like without, this is what, give some sort of explanation that might actually give it a little bit of educational thing, and that way you're not at least insulting kids. Kids are as smart as adults. In fact, sometimes they may be a lot smarter. They may not be exposed to certain things. People that act like kids are idiots, I just want to, scream at them. It's like, you know what? Not only are these kids smart, they're going to have your job, and they might do it right. Working for the people that run these things, they really don't care. The whole, bozo. No, that'll hold the little bastards. That really kind of, at least in children's entertainment, we had more quality control making commercials and a bigger budget and a bigger schedule for a 30-second commercial than we ever got for a 20-minute cartoon. So that shows you unfortunately, where the real care is taken, And with comic books, at least it only comes from maybe 6 or 7 people to produce a comic if it's in color.
Yeah.
Penciler and inker, a letterer, colorist, an editor,
assistant editor, trafficker.
Yeah. So it's by comparison to an animated cartoon where you've got hundreds of people, it's a lot more controllable. But I like cartoons almost as much as I like comic books. My influences were from cartoons and comic books and comic strips and children's books. I probably have the most diverse influences of anybody I know, because my 2 favorite cartoonists are Jack Kirby and Gilbert Shelton, and it's like they're like at opposite ends of the
I would
spectrum.
say Jack Kirby and Robert Crumb.
Oh, okay. Well, then we're similar. But I don't want to keep talking, and I'd love for you to talk. But are there any questions? You guys are nice enough to be
Guy
here.
in the back of the room.
So I wanted to get into comic book writing, and it was having a tough time because I needed an artist on board. So I wrote a novel, and I got it published, and I was trying to use that as leverage to get into the publishers. But I found out last year that nobody cares about my novel, so I'm back to square one, where I got to get an artist on board. Now I know how to tell if an artist can draw out a good character, and I know to look for their storytelling, how they lay out panels and everything. I was wondering if you had any advice about whether or not how to tell if an artist is reliable in a finish a project.
Are you a comedian too?
Sorry?
I said, are you a comedian too? You can't. There's no way to tell. You got to try to find an artist that's as enthusiastic about the project as you are. And you got to keep your fingers crossed. I can't tell you how many things have come across my desk where the artist was plagued, or the writer had a emotional crisis and had to move to Taiwan or something. It happens all the time. So
Yeah,
you
in
really can't
fact,
tell.
there's a guy sitting up here that was going to do a story for a book that the other fellow sitting up here was editing. And at the last minute, and he saw the proof. At least I wasn't giving you a lie. You saw that.
No, it was
I did a good story,
Yeah,
but
it was
I just didn't have time to ink it, and he had to fill it at the last minute with somebody else, and I felt terrible about it. But at least I actually did it. I was a producer. After being a producer, you realize you're looking for people to help solve a problem. You don't need people who are creating yet a second problem for
Right.
you. And that really made me cognizant of not doing things like, hey, the job wasn't done, so it isn't finished. So instead of letting them know that you're working on it day and night, you just stop returning calls.
Yeah.
You don't disappear. You don't, and you never know. Let's face it. I don't want to be too scurrilous here, but we don't have to dress up and go to work. We don't have to stay sober. There's from a variety of things. You never know what we're like. We don't even know what we're like sometimes. Jack Kirby, as far as I know, was a very reliable, hardworking guy because he grew up in a different profession. And Jack's number one priority was taking care of his family.
Absolutely.
But, you know, Jack was a spacey guy at times, not spacey stupid, but his head was in the stars. He was
Oh,
he was
lived in a
constantly
completely
thinking of
different dimension.
ideas.
Yeah.
So in that way, Roz kind of was Jack's handler. And I don't know to what degree, but I have a feeling Roz probably was at least reminding, okay, you have to get this done this day.
Oh, everything. Yeah, everything. She told me, I'm pretty sure it was her that told me, she let him drive once and he rear-ended a cop car. And that was it. She was like, never again, you know.
Even, I heard, even when he would come in like to, because most cartoonists work from their homes or a studio if they have one. But I think Jack lived down on Long Island or something by that time, and Roz would just drive him in to drop stuff off in New York. But then he'd stay for lunch and have lunch with a couple of cartoonists or with Stan. And there was always, I've been told there was always somebody there, again, if Roz wasn't there, to be Jack's handler, because Jack, not that Jack was in many ways one of the smartest men I've ever known, but he'd be thinking of stuff, or he'd be looking at the building, and he could have very easily walked right out in front of a car, especially in New York, where traffic is like being in a sea of mechanical sharks or something. And they were really worried that something might happen to Jack just because people forgot that he's kind of a special guy. And we're all kind of odd people. So, you know, if you're looking, you know, at your problem in particular, and I hate to say this, because I'm a writer as well as an artist, you're a writer, and I don't even know you, but I don't believe that you really know the difference in how to tell a story and not, only because I would say 75% of the writers that I've ever worked with don't know how to tell a story. They're telling you stuff that they obviously don't really visualize it. They're giving you, in a comic book, you're describing what the shot is, and even if they followed it, I don't know if you know what you're doing. And artists also, you know, when you've got something that you're trying to sell, you need somebody that's desperate enough to be willing to do work essentially free of charge, hoping that this thing will sell and hoping that you will like it. And I'm not saying that you're the bad guy, you're just the guy initiating it. But it's very hard to form a creative team. You know, it's like you've got to find somebody that's not only reliable and not only creative, but somebody that you guys can come to something that you're both happy with the results, and you never know until you try it. You know, I'm in a cartoonist group in LA, and I can't tell you how many times somebody will send out a thing. Yes, we just got an email from a writer who has a really great idea for a comic strip, and he's looking for somebody to draw it, and the whole room just laughs. Because it's like, I have the ultimate story on that, and then we can go to ask another question. When I worked at Marvel Productions, and I knew Stan Lee already, but Stan, for a guy that screwed a lot of people, Stan always treated me nicely, so I was always on good terms with him. But Stan came to me one day and he said he wanted me to work with him on a comic. And he may have come to you for the same thing. And it was, for the kids, you're not going to know what I'm talking about. There used to be a comic strip by Jimmy Hatlow called They'll Do It Every Time. And it was like people would send in the guy at the office that always eats all the donuts, or, you know, little domestic or workplace kind of cliches that have the sting of truth. Well, Stan wanted to do something new, and I never forget, he said that, you know, it was like, don't you hate on airlines the fold down lunch shelf, you know, never fits or something. Really hard-hitting, incisive observations like that. And I'll never forget, Stan said, "With my name and your talent, I know we've got a winner." And I'm like, "Oh, that's great, Stan, I'll get back to you." And I thought, I like Stan, But most people that have worked with Stan turn out that created something with Stan don't like Stan.
Yeah.
I kidded Russ Heath, I said, you know, he and Stan are still on good terms, he never created anything together. And I turned him down. I said, Stan, I'm really too busy. And I thought, shit, you're at the point where you turned down Stan Lee, and your head would have exploded if you'd even met Stan Lee when you were 10 years old. And then I mentioned it to somebody, and they said, oh yeah, he approached me 2 weeks ago. I found out he talked to at least 25 people before he'd gotten to me.
But it was your talent.
Yeah, you know, I mean, Stan is one of these guys that has the ability to like Kilgrave the Purple Man. It's like you immediately like him and you do whatever he asks you to do. And
Because of Stan.
yeah, he has this kind of mesmerizing ability to completely hornswoggle you.
Well, I said no to a project with Jerry Siegel, so it was so bad.
I turned down a project with Ross Andrew, who was one of my favorites when I was a kid. He wanted me to pitch a comic book called Garlic Man. And this was when I was working for DC. And it was like he worked with me on the Captain Carrot thing. We started out Captain Carrot with Captain Carrot meets Superman.
Yeah, he did this.
And I actually found myself doing layouts for Ross.
Wow.
Because, you know, he had this, it started out where it was all on Earth, and then when they go to Captain Carrot's Earth, I'm doing all the compositions, so I just went ahead and started penciling, and I said, okay, here, this is, you know, kind of the way I want Superman posed here, because I didn't have any lettering on it, really. And he did, it was like really, he was so smart about it, but then later he was like, he liked the collaboration, so he got me saying, got a great idea for a character, Garlic Man. Do you like to do it with me? And I was thinking, you know, God, I love your stuff and it'd be an honor, but I've got this gig and I can't meet the deadlines on this, you know. And I mean, this was a guy that, I didn't love him like Jack Kirby, but when I was a kid, those Metalmans he did absolutely just blew my mind. I mean, yeah, he was a guy that could draw with incredible appeal. He'd have these like close-ups of faces with eyes that were, there was a pupil, but it was mostly the iris, and it was almost like those Keen paintings of sad little kids. And you just like there was so much heart.